He was a scientist, working to create the right technology for the wrong cause, until an accident transferred his mind into his worker robot. Without his rights, the scientist became a fugitive android, pursued by two warring factions who intended to force him to help them win the war. He continued his life, crossing paths with the turtles and other alien races, until he discovered that everything he knew about himself wasn't necessarily true. Join me today as I explore the story of the original Fugitoid, the first creation from the Mirage universe. The creation of the Fugitoid overlaps with the development of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as I covered in my History in a Half Shell series. Back in 1983, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird were trying to come up with a new comic book creation, inspired by their similar tastes and styles. They had developed a collaborative method of working, where they would loosely sketch alternating pages of a story, refining details and splitting inking duties. Together, they founded Mirage Studios and began working on their first publication, Gobbledygook. It was a necessity at the time, as they tried to sell the first 5 chapters to other publishers, but no one was willing to take the risk on these two unknown creators. This publication isn't considered a regular comic book, because it was photocopied at a local copy shop and then collated and hand-stapled by them. Only 150 copies of the first issue were made. Inspired by the popular TV series The Fugitive and the robot designs of Russ Manning from the classic comic book Magnus Robot Fighter, they created the Fugitoid. C-3PO from Star Wars was undoubtedly on their minds as well. Their initial intention for the story was to release it in individual 5-page chapters, printing them on one sheet of 17 by 22 inch paper, so that the reader could have 4 pages at 8.5 by 11 inches when folded. The last panel would have been a huge poster-sized page visible only when unfolded. This poster magazine idea may have been a little impractical at the time, and was eventually abandoned. Only 2 issues of Gobbledygook were created, but while they were working on the Fugitoid, the creative duo accidentally created the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and all their attention had to be redirected to them. A couple of years later, after becoming an indie sensation, Kevin and Peter decided to complete the Fugitoid saga in a special known as the Fugitoid micro-series. The completion of this story tied in with the events of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 5, and the two properties became so entangled from that moment on that by the time Viacom decided to buy the Turtles, Fugitoid had to be included in the catalog. What made this character so relatable was that it was initially a humanoid scientist known only as Dr. Honeycutt. He had an idea for a device called Transmat that could instantly transmit matter over vast distances across the galaxy. His idea wasn't completely original. It occurred to him when he was a kid, after he and his brother accidentally found Utroms hiding on their planet. After being discovered, the aliens disappeared using a Transmat beam. As an adult, he tried to find sponsors to develop his device, but after being rejected by many corporations, he had to rely on the Human Federation's military arm. They funded him and sent him to work on Atkins Island on the planet Dahunib. His idea could have been used for good, but unfortunately, they wanted to use it as a weapon of mass destruction. For them, this invention could make a difference in finally defeating the Triceraton Republic. After 2 years of intentionally slow progress, General Blank began pressuring Honeycutt to deliver results. But the Doctor didn't really want to deliver their weapon. He simply wanted to finish his newest invention, the Mentawave helmet. This new device was meant to give its wearer the ability to control matter with their mind, effectively granting them telekinetic powers. Expecting the arrival of General Blank, Honeycutt felt frustrated by the situation he had gotten himself into, even becoming envious of Sal, his mindless worker robot. While testing his new device, Honeycutt began picking up Sal's thought patterns, who had gotten tangled in some underground cables in the field. Honeycutt ran to help his robot, but while he was untangling it, an electrical storm caught them by surprise. On their way back to the house, they were struck by a lightning bolt, reducing poor Honeycutt to some charred remains. Since he had an open telepathic connection with his robot, Honeycutt's mind got fused to Sal's electronic brain. It didn't take him long to realize he was now trapped in a robot body. Unfortunately, General Blank arrived with his men on Atkins Island, and they immediately noticed Honeycutt's charred body next to some robot tracks. The soldiers immediately jumped to the conclusion that Honeycutt's robot had gone rogue. Realizing how bad things were looking for him, Honeycutt ran away into the woods, becoming a fugitive. The doctor had been recording his observations on the Mentawave helmet at the time of his death. As a result, his omnirecordex kept recording. Once General Blank found out, he went back to see if he could find any evidence of whatever happened to the doctor. This was how Blank found out that Honeycutt's mind was fused with the robot. This meant that he could still get his Transmat device. In fact, this was terrific news, because it meant that he could now force the professor to create the weapon for him. After all, robots had no rights. Blank ordered his soldiers to capture the robot alive. The android was no longer rogue. He was a fugitive, a Fugitoid, and they would be looking for him wherever he went. The Fugitoid was helped by a crustacean forest creature who sent him in the direction of a city named Peblek. Blank couldn't help but tell his assistant, Lane, about the importance of capturing the android alive. But she was the wrong person to confide that information to. Lane was addicted to a substance known as zemarine that only grew in the Triceraton homeworld, and this piece of information was exactly what she needed to get a lethal dose of it. After learning that the Fugitoid could be the key to unlocking Transmat technology, the Triceraton Republic also started hunting the poor professor. On his way to the city, Honeycutt was ambushed by robot smugglers in a junkyard and taken to a marketplace where he was sold to a humanoid. Honeycutt tried to escape again, but was eventually spotted by the Federats. Lucky for him, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles materialized right in front of him and helped him escape. The Turtles' sudden appearance was the result of a Transmat device at Earth's Utrum headquarters, TCRI. After hearing each other's stories, the Turtles felt hopeful that the Fugitoid could help them return to Earth, especially now that the professor confirmed that his theories about the beam matrix of the Transmat device were true. Unfortunately, all their hopes went down the drain when, after a long chase, the Triceratons took the Fugitoid hostage. The Turtles managed to follow the Fugitoid, but couldn't prevent ending up as prisoners. Prime Leader Zanramon, realizing there was a connection between the Turtles and the Fugitoid, used them as a bargaining chip to force Honeycutt to build the Transmat device for them. Honeycutt knew the Triceratons were a bloodthirsty race, and quickly refused to build the device, even if it meant the Turtles' deaths. Zanramon threw the Turtles into a gladiator arena to force Honeycutt's hand again, but the whole attempt backfired once the Turtles found a way to escape the arena and take him hostage. The Turtles and Fugitoid tried for as long as they could to survive, but defeat was inevitable. Fortunately, the Utrums on Earth were able to track the Transmat beam and transport them back to TCRI, along with the Fugitoid and 3 Triceratons. The surprise appearance of these Triceratons only added to the very precarious situation at TCRI. The military was outside the building, trying to get in, so the Utrums had no choice but to return home. Fugitoid helped the Utrums fix their Transmat device and later escaped with them to their homeworld. A sort of missing chapter was published in 1989 in the Gizmo and the Fugitoid miniseries. This story was a crossover two-parter between Gizmo, Michael Dooney's creation, and Fugitoid. According to Peter Laird, this was an opportunity to close many open plots left unsolved since the Fugitoid microseries and the team-up with the Turtles. Keep in mind that this story has a very loose place in the Mirage continuity, and it's kind of up to you to figure out when and if it happened. In fact, if you ignore the last 2 panels of the Fugitoid microseries, This could work as an alternative continuation without the turtles. Fugitoid had already made a small cameo as an Easter egg in a previous Gizmo adventure, published in the Michelangelo micro-series. But that wasn't supposed to be taken seriously. I'll get around to making a video about Gizmo some other day, but in a nutshell, Gizmo Sprocket was a very unconventional robot who traveled on his sentient ship, Soto, and with his anthropomorphic dog soldier friend, Fluffy Brockleton. In this story, Gizmo and Fluffy took on a 6-week gig for the Federation Reserve Army Corps, and in the wild, found the remains of the Fugitoid. After tweaking his circuitry, Gizmo brought Honeycutt online, who brought them up to date with his backstory. Apparently, the Fugitoid continued escaping from the Federation and the Triceratons, and during his last escape, he ended up on this wild planet. After a while, he put himself to sleep to recharge. Gizmo, Fluffy, and the Fugitoid would end up taken prisoners by the Triceratons, who, once more, would use the Fugitoid's friends as a bargaining chip. This time, Honeycutt decided to actually build the machine. But Honeycutt wasn't actually building a Transmat device. He built a giant Mentawave helmet that allowed him to tap into all the minds within 1,000,000 light-years. In his final message, he told everybody that to prevent anyone from building a Transmat device, he was going to destroy himself. The Fugitoid seemed to die then, and his remains were given to Gizmo and Fluffy, who the Triceratons no longer needed. Away from the Triceraton ship, they found out that the Fugitoid had transferred his mind into Gizmo's 50-gigabyte text pad. After dumping his mind back into the android body, Honeycutt explained that this was the only way to stop being a fugitive. The Utroms were nearby when Honeycutt sent his message, and they were able to track him down again. After offering him asylum, Fugitoid said goodbye to his friends and left for the Utrom homeworld. Despite the loose place this story has in continuity, its resolution was used in the 2003 cartoon, with Fugitoid transferring his memory to Donatello's handheld computer. With this mini in or out, the Fugitoid was already working with the Utroms back in 1987 for a short story published in the RPG TMNT Guide to the Universe, later reprinted in 1989's Shell Shock. In that story, Honeycutt helped the Utroms and the Turtles stop a Triceraton invasion in the Utrom homeworld. Thanks to his partnership with the Utroms, he returned to Earth with them when they decided to reveal their existence and build an interstellar base in New York. Honeycutt's body had been upgraded after all those years, and he could now form shift into a more menacing shape on demand. With this approach, the Utroms started a cultural exchange on Earth that opened the planet to races all across the cosmos. This event brought the Fugitoid back to the Turtles and opened the gate for more sci-fi adventures. One of these took place on the planet Queequeg 5, where the Turtles and the Fugitoid got into a bar fight. During the battle, Raphael accidentally stabbed Honeycutt in one eye. The Turtles brought Honeycutt back to the Utroms, who tried to repair him using parts of SAL 5000 robots. Unfortunately, they didn't know where the professor's mind was physically stored inside his body. They came up with a theory that it might have fused with the memory core, in which case there was no way to know what consequences replacing a critical piece could bring. When they brought him back online, Honeycutt seemed to have lost many of his memories, so the Turtles tried to help him remember as much as he could about his Mentawave device, which seemed to be the key to understanding his nature. But during the conversation, Honeycutt mentioned that the prototype he was wearing at the time of the accident still lacked some of his later improvements, such as a two-way transfer port. That part was essential in uploading small images and records from one source to another. Without it, the helmets couldn't have transferred his mind to Sal. At best, what could have happened was that Sal's working memory was erased by the lightning bolt, and Honeycutt's profile was somehow copied into his circuitry. This was a shock for Honeycutt, because it could mean his mind hadn't been transferred to the robot, only copied. Could it be possible that the original Professor Honeycutt had died that day? Donatello and Raphael used the Transmat device to go back to the professor's lab in Tehunip to study the remains of the prototype helmet. While he conducted his research, Donnie and Raph would keep the Federats at bay. The investigation proved to be very painful for Honeycutt. After a series of flashbacks, he ran away from the lab and ran into the same crustaceous creature that had helped him escape that day. This was very timely, because Honeycutt was considering ending his electronic life. Honeycutt, knowing these creatures could read minds, asked him whether he was the real Honeycutt. This was confusing for the creature. To them, he was Honeycutt. That was how he identified himself when they met. Had he lost his foot? Would that foot be Honeycutt's? Or was the body a mere appendix for his mind? Honeycutt returned to the turtles without scientific answers to his dilemma, only philosophical ones. Sometime after this adventure, Raphael got bitten by a vampire and suffered a beastly mutation. Fugitoid tried his best to understand Raph's mutation, hoping to find a solution to his problem. Given that this volume of TMNT isn't complete to date, it's impossible to know whether the Outrams had any hidden intentions for establishing a base on Earth. However, since the Fugitoid had always been a good person, we could imagine that whatever they were planning was for the greater good. Now it's time for some fun facts. Those who grew up during Turtle Mania probably remember a 1990 Fugitoid action figure that looked nothing like his comic book counterpart. The figure, sculpted by Alec McTurk from Mirage Studios, didn't make it into the cartoon, but similar robots were used during the spaceship stages in the Manhattan Project video game. He was later adapted in that style for the Mutant Madness video game in 2020. Peter Laird pitched a different version of this toy to Playmates. In his view, Fugitoid could have had snap-on and snap-off parts and a vacuum metallized coating. At the time, this was very likely rejected due to its high production cost, but Playmates did release a non-articulated, metallized limited edition of the Fugitoid in 2009. They later released a special metallized version of the character based on his 2012 adaptation. As for the original, NECA released an action figure based on the Mirage Comics, with a glow-in-the-dark variant. While the Fugitoid appeared in a short story and art in the TMNT Guide to the Galaxy RPG by Palladium, he wasn't included in the license. Therefore, his profile was absent from the game. In the recent Redux edition of Transdimensional Adventures, Palladium finally added the character profile to the book. There's something supernatural in the way Honeycutt's mind got fused to the robot. And since there were no more stories taking place in this universe, we never really got an answer to the poor professor's identity crisis. What do you think? Does it make a difference if his mind got transferred or copied? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.